Hi, I'm Linda, and this is episode 21 in my experiences dating as a senior. I had 4 months with VJ. He was a very good kisser. I'll give him that. For a short while, I thought he would be a very good match for me. We had so much in common: music, movies, a hippie past, and our personalities were extremely similar. He was fairly handsome, just a few years older than me, and quite fit with lots of energy. He was also a wonderful, sensitive lover and had a sexy low voice. I considered he may possibly be my soulmate, though I have little faith in that concept. We got along great. We worked together well, regardless of whether it was a DIY project or cooking. It seemed that we would have enough time for each other, as we were both fully retired. He lived an hour and a half away from me, and would stay at my house for a few days, and then I would stay at his place for a few days. He had a lovely house he owned, and a nice new car. His house was way out in the country, almost right on the coast of Scotland, so I got to explore that beautiful area, including a very nice castle. It did feel more isolated than I care for. I grew up in the American suburbs. I like not being in the center of town and still have all the conveniences and access to large shops, like where I live now, on the peripheral of a fair-sized city. I was actually starting to have serious feelings for him. My heart had been locked away since my husband died over 4 years ago. I don't love until I can trust the person. He was affectionate and consistent in keeping in touch with me when we were apart, sometimes calling me 3 times a day, which I appreciated even if we didn't have that much to say. He did warn me that he had some serious baggage regarding his most recent relationship that had ended 4 months prior. They had been together for 4 years, which had gone well up until he had a heart attack. He then went through heart surgery and got a pacemaker. Apparently, the recovery period put a major strain on their relationship because he admitted to being too headstrong and not heeding the advice of his doctors. He felt great after his surgery and would do strenuous activities far sooner than was recommended, which upset his girlfriend because she felt he was taking unnecessary chances with his life, and they got into several verbal fights over it. He said he had been nasty to her over it, so she broke up with him and said she never wanted to speak to him again. He also mentioned he had been a cheater for most of his life, though he had not cheated on his most recent girlfriend. He was obsessed with riding his bicycle. It was his only hobby when we met, and he had all the expensive kit to go with it, including chest and wrist sensors and monitoring units on the bike and his phone. Riding alone or with a group, he would usually go 30 to 50 miles, at least every other day, weather permitting. Then he would come home and spend literally the rest of the day entering the data and comparing it to previous rides, as well as other people in his groups, or even strangers online. He particularly liked the kudos he got from other cyclists. He was very competitive, but I felt I could live with it. He wanted me to ride with him, so I took my badly balanced folding bike, and we explored a cycle path near me. I knew well before that I would hold him back, as I got tired quickly. But it was a pleasant ride, so we talked of doing more. He even talked of buying an electric bike that he would loan to me to ride, as that would solve the problem of my not keeping up with him, and he would have a riding companion. So I researched e-bikes and found them to be very expensive. A battery alone would cost between $500 to over 1,000 pounds if it needed a replacement. I did come across a used one that looked like a good potential and contacted the seller. We were still looking at 1,000 pounds. VJ would have bought it had it been suitable for me. Over the few days it took asking questions and doing research on that model, I was quickly getting the feeling it was a very bad idea. I did not think I would get much use out of it because the weather is too poor most of the time. And I could see him potentially begrudging me for not getting his money's worth out of it if I didn't use it enough. So I was glad to have an excuse to pass on it when I found out the frame was too tall for me. The one thing that did affect me was that his bike riding left him very dehydrated, and that affected his lovemaking. It was great that his cycling gave him stamina in bed, but he had to spend so much time in recovery mode trying to rehydrate. I felt he was pushing himself too hard. Another concern I had was his drinking. He had a huge collection of gin bottles and was proud he had drained every one of them. It was the only thing he collected. I wanted to be with someone who could drink sensibly. My late husband was an alcoholic, and it was a major contributor to his death, as well as causing noticeable problems with his short-term memory. Before long, I was noticing short-term memory issues with VJ, especially when he was drinking, which started late afternoon and sometimes earlier. I well understand being forgetful, like walking into a room and forgetting why you went there. I've had this problem all my life, but it has to do with trying to multitask all the time. I head for the room looking for something specific, but I get distracted by something I see or had meant to do on the way there. By the time I get to the room, my brain has jumped tracks. If I make an effort to be mindful and focus on the project at hand instead of letting myself get distracted, then I have no problem remembering what I went into the room for. VJ's forgetfulness was more pronounced, and he often found himself confused. It would be necessary for him to quit drinking altogether if there was to be any improvement. But I wouldn't say anything about it, because I already had spent years with other alcoholics, and none would listen to me. I knew VJ was stubborn and would resent my observations. Funny enough, the cycling and drinking was not the cause for our first breakup. Everything was going along nicely as we shared another weekend together at my house when VJ got a call that changed everything. He was the emergency contact for his ex-girlfriend. She had been in a bike accident, so he called her. She was actually okay and seemed friendly to him, when before that she would not take his call or talk to him. It brought up all his emotions about her. He still loved her and had major unresolved issues because he acted like he had no clue why she ended it with him, though he named a few things that could have caused it. In any case, I knew I could no longer be his lover, as long as he thought he might have a chance to get back with her. It seemed she would talk to him again, so I sent him home and told him to go work things out with her. Later, he talked to her again, and she seemed more amenable. I figured she wanted him back and encouraged him to ask her out to dinner. He did that the next day, but she would not commit to a date with him. She had a very busy schedule. It left him unable to get a resolution one way or the other. I knew he desperately wanted her back. The switch in my brain had relegated him to the friend zone as soon as he called her from my house. But he respected my insight about what was going on with her, and he called me the next day for advice. We discussed the possible reasons for her reluctance to meet with him. I felt she needed to see that he would be willing to change for her, to listen to her and truly consider her concerns, and then be able to compromise. Relationships are based on compromise if they are to work well. He also had a lot of apologizing to do for his behavior when she did try to get him to be sensible instead of stubborn. Personally, I have found it fruitless to try to get someone to change, even if it is in their best interest. Instead, I end up leaving the relationship. With her talking to him again, he really wanted to get back with her. He thought she was not reading his messages. I told him to write a letter explaining he was ready to change to work things out, and to send the same letter to her message app, email, and even send it through the post, all at the same time. I also suggested they go to couples counseling. After a week, he came back to me, telling me she was just being cordial, that he was done with her, and that he couldn't understand why he was interested in her in the first place. I asked him if he was then free to love, and he said yes. So I let him back into my bed. Things went well for a couple months. He bought an e-bike for me to ride. We went to a few different places to test the bike out. As it was used, I found the rear hydraulic brake didn't work. He got that fixed, and we tried again on a rough road in a park. There were many obstacles that I did not care for, like hikers, dog walkers, and other bike riding families. I had yet to actually enjoy a ride because of that. Then we tried a decent road along the Soloway coast. It wasn't bad, but VJ gave up on me riding with him. He should be able to resell the e-bike. At 3 months into the relationship, I felt we should be talking about living together. I had told him at the start it was my intended goal to live with someone, and he had said he also wanted that, but he wouldn't talk about it. He would go out of town for a few days or more, then would come back and start talking about another trip. He also started talking about getting back into golf and skiing, claiming that he was worried it would bother me that he was gone so much. His children came up to visit him for a week, and he never invited me to meet any of them. And he never talked to them about me. So that was a clue he was hiding me. I started to realize that he was fine with me coming to visit, but he would never be fine with my stuff there. So I would never be more than a guest at his place. I realized I could not depend on him for anything. Because my goal was to live with someone, and I could see it would not be with him, I had to break up with him so I could date again. He had a hard time processing why, so I wrote him a detailed letter to explain it. He called me up after getting my letter and had a confession. 3 weeks prior to me breaking up with him, his ex-girlfriend had another bike crash and called him. So he helped her and found her to be much more amenable to him. He still loved her and decided to woo her back, all the while coming around to mine for sex and attention. So he had not actually changed his cheating ways. He had been making excuses to me about what time he had available so he could get back with her. At least I found out he could truly not be trusted, which always kills love. She can have him. The truth of the matter is that it was kind of a relief. We had a lot of nice sex, but it caused me lady problems. I have reached the point where it just isn't worth it, and I feel all caught up on what I thought I was missing. I enjoyed his company, and we parted as friends. I just feel that he led me on, so I could never trust him again. What do you call a guy who is nice and yet a liar by omission? A lovable rogue? Truthfully, I have a few other words in mind. Some start with A. Some start with B. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe.